Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed colleagues. Thank you for joining us at this year's Police Federation of England and Wales Roads Policing Seminar. It's absolutely fantastic. We've got so many registrations. We've had over 350, and we've got colleagues joining us from Abu Dhabi, New Zealand, Australia and Malta, which shows the level of interest in UK roads policing. A big thank you to our headline sponsor, Slater & Gordon, for making this possible. I hope today will provide useful insight. We'll start the debate around current issues within roads policing and give you a chance to take part in this great event. There will be a chat bar at the side of the screen, which is available to all participants. If you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat bar. The sessions are quite tight in length. We don't have much time on each session. So if your question doesn't get answered, don't worry. We will get an answer to you after the event closes. But please, this is an opportunity for you to take part, enjoy the debate, and I'll move forward now onto our first session. Our first session is a victim-led approach to roads policing. This is going to be a debate. There's going to be a couple of questions to start the panel off, and I'm going to introduce the panel. Firstly, I'll introduce myself. I'm Brian Booth. I am a national board member for the Police Federation of England and Wales, and for them I have the strategic lead for roads policing. I also am a sergeant with West Yorkshire Police and have 29 years service. Part of that service was as a roads policing sergeant, so I have experience in the roads environment, which greatly assists in my day-to-day responsibilities I have now. I'll just go through the panel that's joined us. So I'll welcome, first of all, Richard Crabtree, who's a principal lawyer at Slater & Gordon. Richard, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Thank you, Brian. My name is Richard Crabtree. I'm a principal lawyer at Slater Gordon. I've been dealing with road traffic collision and personal injury claims for over 30 years. I'm also a trustee of Aftermath Support, which is a charity based in Liverpool that provides signposting to victims. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be here today, and thank you for the invite.
Thank you, Richard. If we move on to Raymond Williams, who's the Police Relationship Manager at Slater & Gordon.
Well, those of you who understand the language of heaven, bore da, those who are listening in Wales, and for the rest of you, good morning. I'm Raymond Williams, recently retired from North Wales Police as an RPU LAO. Varied career with North Wales Police, done a bit of neighbourhood policing, response work, and the latter part of my career as an RPU LAO and FLO. And when anybody asks me whether I miss what I miss from the police mostly, it certainly is the FLO role. I think is the most fulfilling and satisfactory role in the force. So good morning to you all, and look forward to the next hour.
Thank you, Raymond. We move on to Ross Morlatt, the CEO for Brake. Good morning, Ross.
Good. Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everybody. So yes, I'm Chief Executive Officer at Brake, the road safety charity. Hopefully you're all familiar with Brake as a charity, but of course we also run the National Road Victim Service, providing specialist case managed care and support for bereaved and catastrophically injured road victims across all parts of the UK. In 2023, we supported more than 2,000 road victims through our National Road Victim Service. I'm delighted to be here this morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Ross, and you're welcome. Chief Superintendent Andy Cox from the Metropolitan Police. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Brian. Morning, everybody. It's really great to be here, and thank you ever so much for the invite. So, as it says on the sheet, I'm a DCS from the Met Police, but I lead the National Collision Board and chair that, and also the Road Crime Reporting Board. And that's the public road crime reporting, so dash cam and head cam. Anybody that follows me knows I'm passionate around this, often sort of on social media and wider media, really, because it's a subject that's so significant and so undervalued, in my opinion. I'm looking forward to sort of chatting that through later.
Thank you, Andy. And finally, Jim Simon, the CEO of Restorative Justice Council. Good morning.
Good morning, Brian, and hello, everybody. My name is Jim Simon. I'm Chief Executive for the Restorative Justice Council. We're a non-governmental organisation that represents the restorative justice field. We're a provider of standards, practice and policy support to both individual practitioners and organisations, working across a range of sectors, but includes criminal justice. We're not a service provider. We don't work directly with victims and offenders. Our role is to set and maintain the standards of practice, which ensure that those participating in restorative justice have access to high quality, safe restorative justice. So thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, James. I've just had a note passed to me that the chat function is currently having issues. So if you are wanting to ask a question, just hold on to it. The IT department are working through those issues, but we should hopefully we'll have it back online very shortly. Right, so we'll head to his first question then. So, with ever increasing workloads for roads policing and family liaison officers, is this limiting the support made available to victims and their families? So if we start off with the panel, and I'll start with Richard. Richard, you work closely with charities with that?
Well, obviously, this is more of a force-led answer, but all I can say is for families and individuals who've been impacted, what I have noticed is basically the resources have basically been reduced over time. Where you used to have an FLO, where you used to have an investigation, it has been dramatically reduced, which is incredibly sad because the FLOs provide a vital link between the criminal justice system and the families. So I would be a strident advocate for more input, but I do appreciate the budget pressures. But unfortunately, that's led to some problems, certainly with some of the families I'm dealing with.
Thank you, Richard. It's probably the best question to ask Mr. Cox first then, was it? So, Mr. Cox, have you got an answer to the question?
I thought you might say that next, actually, after that. Well, I start with the premise really that if you compare the resource levels in murder investigation to fatal crash investigation, they're very disproportionately different. So certainly as chair of national board, we advocated the role became detective based to try and recognise the complexity of it, the seriousness of the investigation, and the difficulty of it, and we've achieved that. So it's not compliant everywhere around the country, but ultimately we're becoming a detective based role for crash investigation that's fatal and life changing. And obviously flows support that. We would never question having a flow work in a murder investigation, yet on occasions we struggle to achieve that within fatal crash investigation. I find that really hard and baffling, to be honest, because ultimately this is a crime, isn't it? Or not every fatal crash of course is crime, but a significant proportion are, and the ones we investigate often end now in Crown courts and can, because of treason, may essentially get a lifetime sentence as well. So I think we probably need within policing circles to reflect on that and think, how do we better support this field? Because I think, being brutally honest, road policing can sometimes be seen as that poor relation in terms of resourcing, and fatal crash, you know, the workloads are very significant, often don't really get the attention they deserve. I mean, for instance, I think people on the line would recognise
I think we've just got a hang.
commented on.
Sorry, Mr. Cox, the connection's quite poor.
How we support families.
Not on our side here.
Can you hear me now?
You went off for the last minute or so. In fact, it's quite poor now. We'll go to one of the other panel members and we might be able to get a better connection. So if we move then to Ross Morlock from Brake, what do you think, Ross?
Yeah, I think this is it's a really interesting question, isn't it? I think in a day and age where, you know, we're we still see 5 people dying on the UK's roads every day, and more than 15 times as many people being seriously injured. I think we can see kind of the significant impact that, you know, police are having to deal with on a daily basis. It was interesting there that kind of Andy talked about kind of the disparity between, you know, kind of how the murder cases are, you know, investigated and the resource that may be put onto them versus, you know, the support and, you know, team and resource that is put onto, you know, kind of road crash and death and serious injury cases. And, you know, I think that is a really important point here. You know, a road death is a you know, a traumatic, violent, sudden incident. So the support element, the support that is provided to families and to people who perhaps have been, you know, catastrophically injured in the crashes themselves is so important. And it's so important that we get that, you know, we get that right, and we get that as, you know, as strong as we, you know, as we can. I suppose, you know, from our perspective at Brake, you know, we see that police resources are squeezed. We see that police officers are often facing difficult choices in terms of the support that they are able to provide. And, you know, we absolutely see that every police officer wants to do the very best they can for a family suffering the, you know, the trauma of a bereavement or catastrophic injury. But, you know, sadly, we do see examples where, you know, support being provided does vary in different parts of the country, and does vary on a case-to-case basis, and that must be very difficult for the you know, the police officers that are involved in providing that that support. And, you know, I think there's an important line to draw here as well in terms of the role of, you know, the police, and particularly the family liaison officers, and the, you know, the specialist support that is available to victims and their families from other organisations such as Brake through our National Road Victim Service. The National Road Victim Service is there to support family liaison officers by freeing up their time, you know, within their challenging roles, and to free them up to do the, you know, the role of the flow, that investigative role that is so important. And, you know, I think it's important, as I say, that we recognise that there, you know, is at the right time, it's important that road victims and families who have been bereaved and catastrophically injured are referred into those specialist support services that are available to them. I suppose the point that I'm making here is that, you know, services like the National Road Victim Service are there to complement and support the police role, and to provide the specialist person-centred support that road victims need. So yes, I think clearly there will of course be some impact on the support that police can provide, but there are other specialist services there to work hand in hand with the police to make sure that road victims get the support that they need when they most need it.
Thanks, Ross. Mr. Cox, are you back online?
I am. I'm so sorry about this. So hopefully it holds out. I think just probably not to, in summary, I think, you know, it's often insufficiently resourced fundamentally when we look at other types of harm. So if you compare obviously a murder investigation to a fatal crash investigation, very differently resourced, and that goes all the way down. And I think it's how we profile it within policing. It's like I mentioned, trying to professionalise a role by training, making it detective based, but around broader support to families. So obviously we've done, as a service now, we've done the Road Peace Challenge, and where we've really called for change around road safety at large, but actually in terms of supporting a crash charity. We've done work with Brake, as Ross will know, in terms of supporting that up and down the country in terms of policing as well. So those links are there, which is really, really positive. But I think, you know, we really, it's not just policing. I have to say this, it's a much broader issue. It's not given the significance it deserves across the system, and I think that needs to change. We have, as one aside, really changed disclosure now. So NPCC recently circulated new disclosure policies and recommendations to every force, with a desire to disclose earlier. So often we used to hide really behind, we've got a criminal case ongoing, we can't disclose. And obviously you might have, for instance, a family that's lost the breadwinner who might have died, and those family are left waiting for the court case, which could take years to finalise before being able to claim civilly. And we've changed that now so it can run simultaneously. And I think that's one message I'd want everybody to understand online, to recognise we can disclose early. That guidance is out there now, we can do it simultaneously, and that allows families and who are obviously going through trauma to at least develop that civil claim to try and make sure they're financially provided for during this time as well.
Thank you for that. Richard, you put your hand up.
Yeah, just really following on from what Andy says and Ross has already said, in that whilst what an FLO could provide is really, really vital, often on the legal side, we can get funds, we can refer to therapies, we can provide support, be it on fatal cases in terms of getting the money in, liaising with the insurers. So being proactive, you know what I mean, and liaising on the civil side and the release of the papers early is really, really beneficial. Because obviously, in many ways, the victims' lives sort of stop, but life goes on. And really, it's about providing the things that they need in the here and the now, you know what I mean, while supporting them through the criminal proceedings. The civil proceedings can provide help, support and finances, to move on and to basically deal with the here and now. So, that is very, very important, but I don't want to take away from what the FLO's role is, because I think in many ways we work together, and that's the important thing, is working collaboratively and basically doing the best for the clients.
Thank you, Richard. James, anything from you?
Thanks, Brian. I echo what's been said already, and coming from a non-policing background, you don't need to read much in the media or watch the news to see services are stretched. Road policing officers, this is one part of multiple tasks that they have to do, and it's always going to be a fine line. But I think we've got to consider that those stretched resources, the increased pressure that people are put under when there's not the finances there to do maybe what we want to do. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that victims and families might not always receive the level of support. And we certainly see within the work that we do with organisations, but also with people that we've spoken to who have either lost somebody or have been left with a significant injury following a road collision, that as soon as this criminal justice process starts, they're then just along for the ride. It's all very factual, it's focused on accountability, and it's the other support that they need as well, and that's quite often forgotten about, and does need thought and time and investment to do it. And we'll talk more about this when we look at what do we mean by justice, but a lot of the people that we've worked with, I think, recognise the pressure that police are under, value the support that they're given, but there's more things that they need, but don't feel that they're sort of readily available at the moment, and that's about not so much the here and now and the immediate aftermath, but what are we going to do? What does the future look like, and how do we start that process of repair? And like Mr. Cox said, that could be years going through the court process, and do I want to wait years to sort of have that support? Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Raymond, you've heard of the other panellists. Is there anything you wish to add or to the debate?
Yes, indeed. My role entails travelling around the UK, visiting various forces, and what's become blatantly obvious to me, it's a very welcoming change in the Act, as we all appreciate in the last sort of 12, 18 months. The new offence of causing serious injury through careless driving. And I think that it's a case of RPU officers having to do more with less resources. We all appreciate there's been cutbacks over the years. And the RPU FLO role is a voluntary role in most forces. Staff actually want to do that role because they are passionate about helping victims that have lost their loved ones. So unfortunately, I think it's a sign with every angle of police forces that officers are expected to do more than they used to with less resources. But FLOs shouldn't need to feel isolated, because Ross has already mentioned the National Victim, the break, and the charities do. But and Richard's touched upon some of the work that lawyers can do. But from my experience as an FLO, it became blatantly obvious how important it is for families to engage with specialist lawyers from the outset, because you think you're not just dealing with a compensation factor, if that entails, but things like wills and probates, because the chances are when somebody gets killed in a road crash, it's totally unexpected. Families probably have very little contact with the police before, and certainly with the legal realms of things like probate and wills. And that's where a specialist company like Slater and Gordon, important to come in from the early days of the crash and work alongside the FLO and the charities to make sure that the families do get the support they deserve and need.
Thank you, Raymond. Right, we'll move on to the next question for the panel, which is, what is justice following a fatal road crash or after sustaining life-changing injury? So, Jim, what is justice?
Thanks, Brian. I've given this a lot of thought, actually, and spoken to a lot of my colleagues. And I think in the broadest terms, when we think of justice, it's about fairness, but it's also about moral rightness. And in the context that we're speaking about today, that can look like seeking accountability through the criminal justice system. It can look like financial compensation for loss of earnings through civil process. But there's also the closure for victims and or their sort of families. Now we know that the current legal system plays a crucial role in justice, and if there is a prosecution, it can provide that sense of accountability, particularly where families have lost a loved one or have been left with significant injuries. On the civil side, we know that there's opportunities for the financial compensation, medical expenses, which again gives some sense of moving forward. But a lot of the people that we work with would say that those processes don't fully restore or alleviate a lot of the feelings that people have. And a great deal of people that we talk to say justice for them is not just about seeking punishment or financial compensation. It's also emotional healing and finding closure. And they may get that from officers, they may get that through therapy or loved ones. But the RJC also believes that could include restorative justice. One of the things that we're sort of continually told by victims is that the criminal justice system just doesn't answer the questions that are important to them. And to sort of give you an example, I was introduced to a young person last week who was left with really serious life-changing injuries following a road traffic collision. And what he said was, the important questions to me were never discussed at any point throughout the criminal investigation. He said, all I wanted to know was, who decided that we should get into the car? Why did we crash? And what actually happened on that night that led to where we are today? And the comment that he said that really stuck with me was that as soon as the criminal justice process started, I no longer had any control. Despite asking lots of people, I was told that those questions aren't important to get a conviction. So from him, yes, there was some accountability there, but actually that wasn't what mattered. why has this happened? Now he has accessed restorative justice, and he said it was the process that enabled him to get the answers that he wanted. It's allowed him to start to find closure. And he actually said to me, restorative justice as has been the start of the process of healing and coming to terms with the injuries that I've got to live with for the rest of my life. So I think when we talk about justice, it has got to be more than, can we get a conviction? It's one element of it, but it's not necessarily what everyone is looking for from a justice system. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Jim. Richard, you've obviously vast experience in this area, so it makes sense to come to you next.
Well, it's there's the criminal side where the individual wants redress and accountability, and as James has said, it really closure on that side. But it runs parallel to the civil side, because the people want to be put back in the position they were, well, as far as possible before the accident. They may have suffered serious or life-changing injury where they need rehabilitation, they need funds. It's a complete change in their life, and they really need significant input to try and help and direct them, as their lives have changed completely from what it was before the accident. To that end, having someone reliable to guide you, to put therapies in place, to get the rehabilitation and the funds required is really, really important. So, what is justice? Justice for me is two-pronged. It's, there is the criminal side, but it's trying to put the person back to where they were before the accident as far as you possibly can do in terms of the rehabilitation, support, etc., so that they can live as full a life as possible. And really, that is my role, and one that I'm very proud to do. I don't in many ways like it when people are injured, but what I can do is be proactive and support them in achieving those aims and those goals, so that their lives, as far as is possible, is brought back to what it was before the accident.
Thank you, Richard. Mr. Cox, are we heading in the right direction from the policing perspective?
There's been an important change which took effect about 18 months ago, which was the ability to have a life sentence. So I remember working on a case where 3 children had died due to absolutely outrageous criminal actions by the driver. And the judge was really keen to sentence beyond what was then the maximum of 14 years, but couldn't. In fact, they actually did, but it was subject to appeal, and it went back down to the maximum of 14. And so we have got that opportunity now, but all the issues that have been referenced, I sort of recognise and agree with. But I think it does point to a bit of a broader issue, if I may just open it up a little bit, just around the whole sentencing of road crime traffic offences. If you compare, let's say, if you compare somebody carrying a knife to somebody extreme speeding, so somebody stopped searched before they used a knife and found in possession of it, rightly can, and I say can, doesn't mean they will, but can be strongly sentenced. Somebody doing, and I've got examples of people doing over 160 miles an hour who have already been disqualified from driving, get a 56-day ban and a relatively minor fine. And you compare the potential harm caused in those two scenarios, and you can argue, can't you, that the driver would have caused far more harm if something had gone wrong. And obviously we know they do go wrong, and it consequences. And I think the whole sort of system doesn't, and things like exceptional hardship, and that people know that's where essentially drivers have totted up 12 points or more and claim to the court that it would have hardship to them in terms of their perhaps their employment, their ability to look after people, etc. And my view is the hardship should be with the crash victims. So, I think it's pretty offensive to families when these people successfully claim hardship. And we've had Premier League footballers successfully claim exceptional hardship through losing their licence. And I think everybody knows you've got to be safe and sensible on the road. You've got to be lawful. And you've had perhaps 4 chances by the time you've totted up enough points to change, and they haven't. So why would they change if they get granted more? So my hardship, therefore, is always with the victims, and we need more support to the victims, and therefore the system needs far more support. So I think in answer to your question, Brian, yeah, there's a reasonable improvement in terms of legislation, but actually in terms of actual sentencing and actual criminal justice, I don't think there is sufficient this yet, and I think we need to really collectively push. So in NPCC circles, we always make recommendations through to the DFT. I know people online do. I know Ross certainly will through Break. So we're making representations around why we need to increase sentencing, crash victims, at the heart of that in terms of their voice being heard and being amplified. We do all the media work now to amplify that, to try and win public support for it. I actually think there is broad public support for it. I think they're pretty outraged by some of the sentences that take place because, talking here about outrageous driving that has fatal consequences or life-changing. But I just don't think the system's quite caught up with that. And I think that's perhaps because too many, maybe part of the wider criminal justice system is just seen as, an accident, one of those things, unfortunate, is perceived differently to other types of crime. And I think the challenge we've got, frankly, as a service is to try and make sure it's seen in the way it should be seen. And it's got so many other links to crime as well. Sorry to prolong this, but it's, there's so many people that drive dangerously and recklessly and choose to are involved in other forms of crime as well. So it's how we profile that, recognise that, and then make an evidence-based claim to basically the DFT and the government to introduce the changes that are needed. And I think sessions like this are really, really important, where you bring in multiple different agencies that have got a voice and therefore can help sort of share that across the country, really.
No, you raised some really good points. I always remember being on the motorway and stopping a driver doing over 90 miles an hour. And I reported him for summons and he pleaded exceptional hardship. And I found out he had over 20 points already on his licence, but was still allowed to keep his licence and more points were added. Absolutely shameful. So I do think, the justice system has to catch up with the real life experience of what we're feeling, what certainly my members are feeling, and as our fellow organisations, how you perceive injustice through the system.
Just on that, Brian, sorry to before me, 1 in 5 successfully claim exceptional hardship. How can 20% be exceptional, firstly? But so 1 in 5, so this is not like a few, is it? It's widespread, essentially. Yes,
it's far more common than it gets publicised. Raymond, anything from you on this question?
Well, yes, you always think of justice like a nice flowing river with little stepping stones across it, and justice means different things to different people. For police officers, clearly they need to get that person, whoever it is, before the courts, and hoping that the criminal justice system serves its purpose. But for family members, occasionally, yes, some of them want to throw away the key and send somebody to jail. But I was involved in the first batch of training restorative justice officers in my days as neighbourhood policing, and I'm so pleased that that's now evolved, to include people that have ended up with prison sentences for killing people with their vehicles. And I remember, I think it was the last year before I retired, where actually a person had been discharged from jail, and the meeting he had with the mother of the young person that he'd killed with his car over the drink drive limit, that meeting between them both was so powerful. In fact, the prison centres, yes, he'd served it, he was a family man himself, but to actually being able to face the mother of the young person that he'd killed and having to open and frank questions, and that was just so powerful. And I think this different sort of approaches to justice, and different people need justice in different ways, but as the word evolves, I think things like restorative justice certainly need to sort of be an important part of the process.
Thank you, Raymond. Ross, what's your point of view?
Thank you. And yeah, I was finding myself nodding away as all the other panel members were talking there. And I think an important place to start is that all road victims are different. I think they're very likely, as the panel members have said, to have perhaps a different view of what justice is in their eyes and what they are looking for. And I think that's important for us to bear in mind. And I think in quite a lot of cases, I think it's probably reasonable to assume that true justice in the eyes of a bereaved or an injured individual may never really be achieved. I mean, how is it possible to replace or make up for the loss of a loved one, or to reach, you know, a level of acceptance and peace of mind, you know, when someone has suffered kind of life-changing injuries and they're experiencing that and living those every day. I think it's, you know, we see, and from, you know, the road victims that we support, you know, some are never really able to fully accept what has happened, or consequently feel that justice has actually really been achieved. And to continue really what I think Andy was saying, that, you know, as a society, I think we must do better than we are doing at the moment. And I think, you know, there needs to be a change in the current system, or the way the current system is working, if we're going to get closer to delivering what I think we would all say is kind of true and real justice. You know, sadly, it's all too common for us to encounter and to be supporting road victims who feel that the end result of, you know, a protracted, often complex investigation and, you know, multiple kind of journeys through the courts is a real disappointment to them. In some cases, we see this kind of re-traumatizing the individual and putting them back to where they were very soon after the crash, you know, happened. It's very difficult for them to get closure through some of these processes. Time and time again, as Andy was saying, that we've seen wholly unacceptable lenient sentences handed out to reckless drivers who have killed other road users. And we often hear this said, but, you know, driving is a privilege, it's not a right. And those who show a disregard for the law shouldn't be allowed to endanger other road users again. They simply should not be allowed to do it. It's also important to note that, particularly with road victims, that they are thrust into, you know, facing complex procedural challenges, things that, you know, most will never have experienced, you know, before. So, you know, all the stuff that the other panel members have been talking about, you know, things like the legal support in particular, is so important to road victims, to guide them, to hold their hand through these complex and challenging processes, and to make sure that they get what they should get and what they're entitled to as part of the justice process. And many of you, I'm sure, will have seen the Fix Our Broken Justice System campaign, which is being run by our friends at Road Peace. And, you know, Break very much stand alongside Road Peace in their key campaign asks as part of that. And again, I'm repeating what, you know, a lot of what Andy said here, but I don't apologise for that. So longer sentencing for dangerous drivers. So since July 23, that lifetime jail sentences can be imposed for causing death by dangerous driving. You know, we are seeing sentences still being far too lenient. And, you know, the Road Peace's campaign is highlighting those and raising more awareness of those, which is really important. Lifetime driving bans. You know, courts have the powers to impose lifetime driving bans. So why aren't they? Is the question. You know, why should somebody who has killed on our roads through their reckless actions ever be legally allowed to drive again? You know, when we're talking about what do road victims want and what do they see as justice, certainly I think a lot of them would question why, you know, someone who has killed one of their loved ones should be able to get behind the wheel of a vehicle again. And something that Break also believe in as well that's important is that drivers who kill, who are seriously injured, should be taken off the roads once they are charged as a condition of their bail. One of the things we often hear from those that we support is that you know, a driver that has, you know, killed, you know, a family member is still driving around their local community, still speeding around their roads, and is almost flaunting what they've done in the faces of those bereaved families and loved ones. How can that be possible? You know, so we know that prosecutions can often take months to come to court, and you know, as I say, many drivers that are charged are able to continue driving during this time, and that can't be right. If we're putting victims front and centre and you know, supporting road victims in, you know, probably the most challenging times of their lives, we need to be looking at these things. And I'll finish with, you know, again, what Andy talked around, that, you know, the conditions of the exceptional hardship rule that, you know, are being flaunted and abused, you know, on a daily basis. The exceptional hardship defence should only be granted in truly exceptional circumstances, and clearly that is not how that is being used at the moment. So I think there's lots of work for us to do here, for us to get close to achieving anything close to what a road victim would sit here and tell you today is real justice for them and their family.
You make some really powerful points there, Ross, and thank you for that. Right, we'll move on to our next question, which is, how can a solicitor assist a victim and their family of a road traffic collision in the early stages? Unfortunately, still don't have the chat bar working, but I'm obviously going to go to the solicitors first. So, Richard, over to you.
Well, I hope I can answer this one. No, I think obviously it's a very important role. When a client comes to you, be it a fatality or a life-changing injury, there is a long road ahead in the civil proceedings. It isn't going to be an immediate resolution. Sometimes liability is disputed, sometimes it's admitted, but there is a journey both in terms of the liability position to find out fault, which often means liaising with the police to try and gather evidence at an early stage whilst the criminal prosecutions may be ongoing. Sometimes it's easier than others. Often it's quite difficult to get it during an ongoing investigation. So sometimes you have to park that and work with the insurers. Whilst we have an adversarial, it is important that you work collaboratively with the insurers as well as the clients, because that often means to getting the best results. Often, it's you don't attract bees with vinegar. You've got to work together. You know what I mean? It's all right being aggressive, but you've got to be aggressive in the right measure at the right times. Ultimately, it's getting the best results for the client. So working with the insurers, making contact at an early stage, getting funding for rehabilitation and initial assessments of that, putting in place the therapies, looking at the aids and equipment, the support, care, all these things that are, it's multifaceted. There isn't just one answer, and it's really, really important. And as well as providing money. Money is important because we all have mortgages and we all have expenses. So getting security for individuals and families at an early stage, so they're not worrying whilst their main breadwinner is out of action or not at work, is really, really important, because it's one less thing to worry about at a very stressful time in their lives. So being able to do this and achieve this is paramount. So sitting down with the client and also mapping out the journey, working with other actors in this field, such as case managers who will bring together the therapies, the care, the equipment, and potentially accommodation issues, is really, really important. And it's taking through. So the earlier we are involved at the outset, the more we can do. And it isn't about waiting till the end of the criminal proceedings. Getting in contact with a solicitor such as Slater and Gordon at an early stage actually, improves the quality of the client's position as well, because we can be proactive and we can actually help them at a time of extreme trauma and upset. I can't resolve things, I can't replace loved ones, but what I can do is try and provide that security, so it's one less thing to worry about at a very, very traumatic time. So, I'm proud of what we are able to achieve, but it does sometimes mean working collaboratively, not only with the police, but working with the insurers. And, contrary to popular belief, some insurers have a quite an enlightened view, and a lot of them, particularly in serious injuries, have specialist insurance panels with solicitors on the other side who you come across again and again. So it will be the same people you've spoken to, and often you can move that case forward and get the resources and the input that you need very, very quickly. You know, solicitors, you know, as much as we are denigrated for many things, I think it's a really, really important thing that we can do at an early stage, which can provide a really, really positive outcome for the families.
Thank you, Richard. Raymond, have you anything you wish to add to that? You want the question again, because it's not on the screen. I'm just conscious.
No, it's okay. Obviously, like a lot of things, like Richard said, we work for the same company, but sort of recently coming to a firm like Slater and Gordon, having been a police officer so long, I was quite ignorant of some things. And one classic example, and this is a North Wales job that's not very old, where there was a young man having sustained serious injuries. He'll never walk again. And he was in one of the NHS hospitals in North Wales, undoubtedly having fantastic care from the nurses and the doctors. But by coming to a specialist lawyer, he was able to have private treatment in a private hospital with much better facilities, unfortunately, than what the NHS could offer. And whilst he was there, Slater and Gordon were able, using our rehabilitation officer, to find accommodation that allowed him to be discharged from hospital sooner. And even though, sadly, he will never walk again, at least the quality of what life at Isleston was able to do to, you know, the company and that specialist team behind him from day one. So we just urge that these, you know, families do have the support of a specialist lawyer, with a highlight on the specialist, you know, from day one, to get that quality service they deserve.
Thank you, Raymond. Andy, Jim and Ross, I don't know if you want to answer anything with that question or clarify anything.
If I can, thanks, Brian. I'll just say something really quick. So we bring in legal firms and legal reps into the National Collision Board. So it is trying to have that two-way exchange of how we operate, how they operate, how we can better do things. I think there is some work to do with Break and Road Peace, for example, and others in that space where we quickly align and get the support in place at a really earliest possible situation, because that so often then links to sort of legal advice and support to and connections that families need in their trauma, because obviously families going through trauma, if they're unsupported, we can imagine what that looks like. So having those connections early on, which will then help with the sort of civil claims and legal stuff, is really important. And then ultimately, like I said earlier, that whole disclosure work we've done around early disclosure is absolutely fundamental. And I think before we did that, we often said we couldn't disclose. We're still saying that far too often, by the way. So we do market it and try and get it understood everywhere, because we can disclose and use that policy, which has gone through all the legal, checks that needed to be in place to make sure we're okay to disclose. We have got that policy we can use now, and it's obviously a case of making that more widely known, and that early interactions is vital. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Andy. Ross.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo really one of Raymond's last points there around the importance of working with that specialist legal firm, and that really is a critical element of of this across those we support within Break's National Road Victim Service. We see the downside of those road victims who perhaps have done a quick Google search and come to a local firm or a firm that hasn't got that true expertise in this area, and what we sadly see is that they are therefore not getting the level and quality of advice and guidance that they should be getting. So Raymond made a really important point there around that critical bit of working with a specialist firm such as Slater and Gordon, and getting the benefit of their years of experience there, the tens of thousands of road victims that they will have supported in very similar circumstances, and the breadth and depth of expertise that they have is super important. An example of how we manage that within the National Road Victim Service at Break is that we have a legal panel in place, which Slater and Gordon are part of, and we vet those legal firms robustly before they're able to come and sit on our legal panel. We recognise the importance of that legal advice and that early specialist legal advice for road victims. And from our perspective, it's about getting road victims access to the right firm, the specialist firms for that advice as soon as we possibly can. So yeah, it's really important that the right firms are used, because it can go wrong if they're not. Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. We're coming to the last 5 minutes. We've still not managed to get the chat bar working, which is unfortunate. So we are going to break this session 5 minutes early at 10:55, still coming back at 11. Just give the chance to IT to see if we can get it working. But I have one last question. And when is it the right time to think about restorative justice? And I think, Jim, you're going to be the first up on this one.
Thanks, Brian. What I would say is, I don't think there is an absolute definite this is the right time. I think it's something that people will access when it feels right for them. I mean, from our perspective, it's about having information about that at the earliest possible opportunity, and having the opportunity to talk to somebody who is a trained restorative practitioner about what that looks like. But it's not a one-time offer, and it shouldn't be. And certainly we're doing a lot of work at the moment around the contents of the Victim and Prisoner Bill about when that offer should be made. And I think the one thing that's consistently come across is for restorative justice, but actually every support service sort of falls into this, is it's the quality of that initial information, and then it's continually revisiting that, because it might not be right at that point, but it might be something that I consider later on down the line. In terms of restorative justice overall, I mean, there has to be some element of responsibility being taken. So there does have to, it does have to go a way down the process for us or practitioners to be certain that the person who has committed the harm is actually going to take some responsibility for that. But it's also about the realistic outcomes that are expected by either party. If you've got someone saying, this is what I want, I need him to say, or her to say, it's an apology, or I need them to do this, or I need them to do that, and that isn't realistic, then again, it's sort of managing those expectations. But for most people, just that initial conversation and the opportunity to talk through, and like I said about the young gentleman I met last week, to explore some of those questions that aren't important to others, and quite rightly probably not important to others because they've got a role, but there's a great deal of people who access restorative justice. That doesn't mean they end up in front of the person who's caused harm, but that process of preparing and talking through and getting information that they can't get from anywhere else is enough. So sorry, Brian, that there isn't a definite this is the right time, but it's information at the earliest possible opportunity. That information is provided by someone who's got the knowledge and experience to give it the specialist background, which goes exactly to what Richard was saying. I could probably give a bit of legal advice, but I'm not a solicitor, and it's going to be based on what I can Google. Is not useful for anyone, and that's the same for things like restorative justice, talking to that trained person. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. If I can just bring in Andy finally for that same question. In policing, are we falling behind restorative justice, and is it working for us?
I think we are behind it. I don't think we're using it particularly well in this particular space, though. So we do obviously have speed awareness workshops, so there is an element of that features there. But I think we need to be a bit braver around it. I'm keen to speak to James offline. I've just messaged, actually, I don't know if you're in the group, but it's about, so I haven't just picked up the lead for Met Detention. I think I've got an opportunity to pick up some of those things around bail conditions for drivers, but also RJ. So I've got this view in my head, for example, a drink driver might, if we could work with one of the charities perhaps around an RJ approach, where we could evaluate it over time to see actually if they do happen to speak to a crash victim as a consequence of drink drive, and then look at sort of rehabilitation and reoffending as part of that. But I think big fan of RJ, and I think actually there's so much scope and opportunity here, because I know personally so many powerful speakers who've lost people who are perhaps permanently disabled as a consequence of this, who sort of make the hairs on your back and neck stand up. So if we could start to tap into that and really focus minds, because I think it's almost like habit for some drivers. They just do it, they don't really see the harm in it. And actually if we can start to connect victims with those type of drivers, then we could have that impact. So, and we do obviously do stuff like Drive Safe Stay Alive with young people, where we use crash victims and their families, but I think it's much wider than just young people as well.
Thank you very much, panel. It's been an excellent debate. You've brought a wealth of experience to the debate that we've had.